Star Trek's USS Enterprise originally had a different name, and I'm glad Roddenberry changed it. In his original 1964 pitch document for Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry originally named his starship the USS Yorktown. A World War II veteran, Roddenberry chose Yorktown because of the American aircraft carrier USS Yorktown, which was named after the last major battle of the American Revolutionary War. Coincidentally, the USS Yorktown was of the same class as the USS Enterprise, the name Roddenberry finally decided upon for Star Trek's primary starship. Enterprise has proven to be a savvier choice for Star Trek's most famous starship than Yorktown. Enterprise, as a noun, means an undertaking that is difficult or risky, which is a much better description for a starship that explores strange new worlds and goes where no man has gone before. Yorktown doesn't conjure the same sense of excitement or adventure as Enterprise, and Gene Roddenberry was wise to make this crucial switch that held him to what Star Trek is all about. USS Yorktown still became part of Star Trek after John Roddenberry decided on naming his starship the USS Enterprise. 3 versions of the USS Yorktown have been mentioned in Star Trek. In Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, the USS Yorktown's bridge was seen when it encountered the devastating whale probe. Star Trek The Next Generation Season 2's The Measure of a Man mentioned the USS Yorktown. Star Trek Picard's Season 3 also had the USS Yorktown chasing the USS Titan A. Star Trek Beyond introduced Starbase Yorktown, a planetoid-sized space station encased in a protective bubble that was targeted for destruction by the villainous Krall Idris Elba. With its multi-dimensional cityscapes, Starbase Yorktown was a wonder to behold. Captain James T. Kirk Crispine applied to become Vice Admiral in charge of Yorktown, although he ultimately chose to remain captain of the Enterprise. Star Trek, the original series, simply wouldn't have had the same verve if it were about the voyages of the USS Yorktown. When Gene Roddenberry sat down in the early 1960s to craft what would become Star Trek, he wasn't just creating a television show, he was imagining a future. Better one. A more optimistic one. A bold one. And nothing embodied that vision more than the starship at the heart of it all, the USS Enterprise. But what many fans don't know is that the Enterprise, that iconic name now etched into science fiction history, almost had a very different name. And let's just say, thank the stars that Roddenberry changed his mind. The original name wasn't Enterprise. In the earliest outlines of Star Trek, before the first scripts had even been fully drafted, Gene Roddenberry considered naming his ship the USS Yorktown. It wasn't a bad name. It had deep naval roots, most notably linked to the legendary WWII aircraft carrier. The USS Yorktown, CV-5 and later CV-10, was a symbol of American courage and perseverance during the war. In Roddenberry's mind, that name carried historical weight and embodied the same spirit of exploration and duty he hoped to project into the stars. But as the concept evolved, so did the ship's identity. Roddenberry was a former bomber pilot and Los Angeles police officer, and he had a great respect for naval tradition. Initially, his idea was to translate that nautical sensibility into a space-faring vessel. So calling the ship something like Yorktown made sense. It was a tribute to real-world bravery. But when the time came to commit, something didn't feel right. The name Yorktown, while noble, didn't quite have the sleek, futuristic punch Roddenberry envisioned for his galactic flagship. Enterprise had gravitas and legacy, so why did Roddenberry settle on Enterprise instead? Well, for starters, the name already had a legacy in naval history just as powerful, if not more so, than Yorktown. The USS Enterprise CV-6, known as the Big E, was one of the most decorated American ships in World War II. It was the kind of name that carried with it valor, resilience, and prestige. But even more than that, Enterprise had a certain poetic rhythm. It sounded like a mission, a journey, a dare. Enterprise didn't just describe a ship, it described the very act of seeking out new life and new civilizations. It was synonymous with boldness, exploration, and human curiosity. Where Yorktown sounded like a fortress, Enterprise sounded like an adventure. And Roddenberry knew it. The name helped define the tone of Star Trek. Imagine if Captain Kirk stood on the bridge and gave the famous order, "Take us out, Mr. Sulu. Engage warp drive. The USS Yorktown is headed to the final frontier." Not quite the same, is it? The name Enterprise shaped Star Trek's identity as much as its philosophy or technology did. It wasn't just a vessel, it was the spearhead of the Federation's exploratory mission. It became a symbol of peaceful discovery, of diplomacy backed by strength, and of the endless reach of human imagination. Enterprise wasn't just a name, it was a statement. It told audiences, this is not just another spaceship show. The power of a name in world building. In speculative fiction, names matter. A lot. What you call your planets, your ships, your species, they help shape the tone, the expectations, and even the emotional connection an audience has to the world you're building. Would Star Wars have felt the same if Luke flew in a ship called the Ravenclaw instead of an X-Wing? Would Tolkien's Middle-earth have resonated the same if Frodo lived in Cuzzyville instead of the Shire? With Star Trek, Roddenberry wasn't just making choices that sounded cool, he was building a mythology. And Enterprise fit perfectly into that grand vision. It sounded aspirational. It sounded capable. It sounded infinite. The Enterprise became the franchise's beating heart. Another reason I'm grateful for the change? Enterprise became a brand in itself. The USS Enterprise didn't just serve in the original series. It became the connective tissue across decades of Star Trek storytelling. From Kirk's original NCC-1701 to Picard's sleek Galaxy-class NCC-1701D to Archer's pre-Federation NX-01 in Star Trek, Enterprise, the name has echoed across centuries of fictional history and real-world time. Even when Starfleet introduced new hero ships like Voyager, Defiant, or Discovery, they never held quite the same mythic weight. Why? Because the Enterprise is Star Trek. Every time a new Enterprise launches, it feels like a renewal of the franchise's mission and promise. Had the ship remained Yorktown, it's possible we wouldn't have had that anchor, that singular name that fans could rally around generation after generation. Gene Roddenberry made the right call. Gene Roddenberry's decision to change the name wasn't just a cosmetic tweak, it was foundational. It's one of those behind-the-scenes details that had seismic consequences. It gave the franchise its signature vessel. It gave the fans a symbol. And it gave every iteration of Star Trek a spiritual center. Even outside the Trek universe, the Enterprise became a cultural touchstone. It's been referenced in everything from The Simpsons to Ready Player One, The Big Bang Theory to Futurama. The name conjures images of gleaming corridors, warp cores, and captains standing tall with the galaxy before them. No one needs to ask, which Enterprise? They already know what it represents. There's even a real USS Enterprise. The power of fiction can bleed into reality, too. The name Enterprise was so resonant that the U.S. Navy named a real aircraft carrier, CVN-65, after it, launched in 1961 as the world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Later, when CVN-80 was announced, fans were delighted to learn it would carry the name Enterprise, keeping the lineage alive. NASA even got in on the action. After fans mounted a letter-writing campaign in the 1970s, the first space shuttle was christened Enterprise, a direct nod to Roddenberry's fictional ship. That's how much the name meant to people. Not Yorktown. Enterprise. Conclusion: a small change that changed everything. It's fascinating to think that one of the most iconic ships in pop culture history could have gone by a different name. In another timeline, the USS Yorktown might